Hashem, we're back again. Yom Tov time, and last week I really felt awful and couldn't give any shiurim, but Baruch Hashem, I feel much, much better. And this week I came back to my normal schedule of Harbotzas Torah. I still have a nasty cough, as you will probably realize in the next few minutes. I hope not, but I am feeling much better. So Baruch Hashem, this week's parsha we have so many mitzvahs. Achrei Meis Kedoshim. But the sugya we will be discussing today is a very relevant as well as a very fascinating sugya. B'chukoi seyem lo teilechu. So the Pasuk says, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe medaber b'nei Yisrael v'amartu aleihem ani Hashem Elokeichem. K'ma'aseh Eretz Mitzrayim asher yeshavtem ba lo ta'asu, u'k'ma'aseh Eretz Canaan asher ani mevi eschem sham lo ta'asu, u'b'chukoi seyem lo teleichu. So today we will be discussing a few interesting questions, halacha l'maisa, but first, the fundamentals. Two specific questions. Bechukoteihem shel mi. Whose rules are we not to follow? Whose laws are we supposed to keep away from? Who are those bechukoteihem? And the second question, which type of chukim? Regarding question number one, sholosh machlokes bedavar. Three different opinions in the Rishonim. Sefer Yereim, Rebbe Elazar Memetz, Baalei HaTosfos. There are two different editions, as well known. In one of them it's Siman Peichet. The other one is Mitzvah Shin Yud Gimel. His interpretation of the Pasuk is totally literal. The Pasuk says, K'masei Eretz Mitzrayim asher yeshavtem bo lo ta'asu, Uchemase Eretz Canaan asher ani mevi eschem shamo lo ta'asu. This lav refers only to two categories. Shevo amim sheyoshvu b'Eretz Yisrael, and that is Kemase Eretz Canaan. Hachiti, Hayevusi, Hapruzi, V'Gergoshi, and Mase Eretz Mitzrayim. Only 8 nations, 8 peoples. According to the Yereim, it isn't relevant today because we know nothing about their rules. These nations are no longer existent today. Sefer HaChinuch Reish Samach Beis broadens the scope, and he says, all the peoples, nations that are Oivdei Avodah Zorah. So many countries in the world today are no longer Oivdei Avodah Zorah. The Rambam, two different sources, Sefer HaMitzvos Lo Ta'aseh Lamed, and more obvious, Hilchas Avodas Kechov in Perek Yud Aleph, the Rambam's opinion is across the board, all the nations. And the Rambam also quotes the Pasuk, Va'avdil eschem minhu amim. I separated you from all the other nations, and you are the chosen people, and therefore you should learn from none of them. And the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur follow in the footsteps of the Rambam in Yoredei Siman Kuf Ayin Chet. Regarding question number 2, what type of laws and rules are we prohibited to adopt? That's a big machlokes between the Ramah and the Gra. First Sif, Siman Kuf, Ayin Chet in Yoredei. And the Ramah follows in the footsteps of Chuvas Maharik, Shorish Peiches. The Merik's opinion is based on Rashi, Sanhedrin, Ayin Daled. So let me explain. And I want to quote the Lashon of the Ramah because it is so fundamental and so important. When the Shulchan Aruch, following in the footsteps of the Rambam, writes, we need to abstain from Chukas Hagoyim, we cannot dress like they dress, we cannot have a haircut or a hairstyle like their hairstyle. The Rama writes, Kol ze einoi osur ele bedover shenagu bo oivdige chovem l'shem pritzus, כגון שנהגו ללבוש מלבושים אדומים, והוא מלביש סורים, וכדומה לזה ממלבושי הפריצוס, או בדובר שנהגו למנהג ולחוק ואין טעם בדובר די כלמי חשבי, שיש בו שמץ אבוידס כחובם מאבויסיהם. There are more rules based on Marik, based on Rashi, Sened, and Ayin Dalad Amid Beis. Only two criteria are prohibited. Anything that has pritzus, anything that is a violation of tznius, or anything associated with worship, with religious practice, which includes anything they do which doesn't make sense. And if we don't understand what's the benefit of this minig, why do they do it, then we are to assume that obviously it originated with Avodah Zorah. And then the Ramo goes on, Dove shenago letoeles, כגון שדרכון שכל מי שרויף המומחי יש לו מלבש מיוחד. Going back 500 years, 600 years, the custom already was that a doctor had a special uniform. And that is mutter, because yesh boteles, we understand the rationale. It's important that people know who are the doctors and who are not the doctors, who are the qualified ones, the licensed ones, and who are those that are totally unqualified. Today there are so many different parts of the population that wear uniforms. Cops, soldiers. You go into any hospital in the world and you see a doctor dressed in green, you know, he's a surgeon. Nurses have their uniforms. Flight attendants. In some classy restaurants, the melzerim, the waiters, have special uniforms. That is permitted according to the Ramo because we understand the benefit, we understand the rationale. And then the Ramo goes on, וכן מה שעושה משום כבוד, או טעם אחר מותר, ולכן סורפן על המלוכים, ואין בו דרכי או המוירי. The last line is the important one. The Ramo says, סורפן על המלוכים. Why is that permitted? Because we understand the rationale. It is mishum kavod. What are we dealing with? In days of yore, there was a minute when a king passed away. We burned all his garments, his clothes, and his personal items. And that is an expression of grief on one hand, but more than grief, honor. It is as to convey a message. Our beloved King, you're so great and important that no one else could wear your clothes, or no one else is entitled to use your personal items. So the Ramo says that is the heter of Sarfan ala Malochim, because it's Mishum Kavod. The Gaon and Biragro disagrees with the Ramo and with the Marik. He rejects their opinion, and he argues, any minag goyim, all of them across the board are prohibited unless we have a source for this minig in our Kizvei Kodesh in Torah Nevi and Viksuvim. And that is the Gro's interpretation on Sorfen ala Malachim. This is a Gemara twice in Shas, but this is Yud Aleph Amid Aleph Sanheder Nun Beis Amid Beis. Sorfen ala Malachim v'yein bo mishum darkei amoiri. Why? Kiven dechsive bioraisa. It's in our Torah. And therefore, we don't learn from them. Maybe they picked it up from us. Who knows? We follow the footsteps of our Avois Avoiseinu. And the Gemara quotes a posuk in Yirmiyahu, Perek Lamed Daled, B'Sholem Tamus, u'b'misrafois avoisechu arashonim yisrafu lecha. So this is our custom, and therefore wouldn't be Chukas Hagoyim. So the Gaon proves from that very same Gemara, all Chukas Hagoyim are prohibited, even those that are Mishum Kavod, even those that have rationale, unless we have a source in our sources. The Ramo's understanding is when the Gemara brings the posuk in Yirmiyahu, it's not because we need a posuk. It's just to prove that this minig is not Mishum Avodah Zorah. It's not associated with religion, but rather Kvoid Shavuos. The Ramah and the Gaon go l'shitosam, and the Gra goes l'shitosam in three different sources. Magen Avraham Taf Tzadik Daled, Minhagei Chag HaShavuos. We're in the midst of Sviras Ubaymer. We're almost there. So the Ramah writes a minig that we bring grass and flowers into the shuls for Shavuos. Zecha l'matan Torah. The Magen Avraham on the spot brings a different minig. We bring trees, not only flowers and twigs and grass, but trees into the shul. And why is that? Atzeres nedoinem al peres uilan, people shall daven for peres uilan. We have two early sources quoting the Gra, going against this minig. Maaserav, Chayodam twice, Chayodam Kuf Lamed Aleph, Chachmas Odam al Yerodei Semen Peitet. And the Gaon says, Chukas Hagoyim. Lecha Oira, the Gaon has no objection to the minig of grass or flowers. He only objects to the minig of being trees, and it's Chukas Hagoyim. Many people mistakenly think that it's Chukas Hagoyim because of those trees that the Goyim bring into their homes Christmas. No. The Chayodam says the Goyim have a chaga, have a holiday named Pfingsten, Pentecost. Pentecost is a Christian holiday. They count 50 days from Easter, and that's Pentecost. Lahavdil elef alfi avdolas, lahavdil ben hakodesh u ben hachoil. They copy us. We count 50 days, actually 49 days from Pesach to Shavuos. They count 50 days from Easter to Pentecost. And on Pentecost, their minig was bringing trees into houses of worship or personal homes. And that is why the Gaon says, Chukas Hagoyim. Even though the Magen Avraham gives a different reasoning. Peres u'ilan, people should daven. We have nothing to do with them. The Gaon l'shitosoi. If it's their minig, we don't have any early source in Torah Nevi'im v'Ksuvim, it is prohibited. Both sources, Masarav and Chayodam, quote the Gaon, only rejecting the minig of trees. He has nothing against flowers or grass. Obviously, the Goyim didn't do that. So it's a pellet that the Aruch HaShulchan bundles everything together. And it's bechlal a strange lashon. The Aruch HaShulchan writes, Noyagim lachnis asavim, that's the Gaon. Ilonis, that's the Magen Avraham. Ubedoires achroinem bitlu minhogam eila al yedei gedoli yesor metam hayadua lohem. First of all, he writes, he goes against grass and trees, and I think that's a mistake. And I don't know why in Litvish shuls today they don't bring flowers or twigs or grass into shuls on Shavuos. It's Minig Ashkenaz, written in the Ramo, adapted by the Magen Avraham. There's a story of Vechsam Sofer. He once was in a town, Shavuos, he came into shul, he saw no green. He left the shul, and he didn't want to go back to that shul till after Yom Tov, because he said it's against Minhag Avoseinu. So the Gaon rejects the minhag of trees. He has nothing against grass or flowers. The Aruch HaShulchan puts them all together. And it's a strange language. Gedol Yisrael metam hayadu alahem. Why doesn't he quote the Gaon? He's the only one. And he clearly says, why? Chukas Hagoyim. So the Aruch HaShulchan is strange to me. But anyway, Gaon l'shitosoi, Ramo l'shitosoi. Number 3, Gzeras halavush. And this is a Gzera that came back again and again and again. Lithuania, Russia, Poland. First source, Chachmas Odom Peitet. Nahirna, I remember, when in our beautiful city, Vilna, the Goyim, the authorities gave a decree that Jews must change their garb, their traditional garb. And it's a prohibition for Jews to wear their traditional begadim, and they need to dress up like the locals. Shomati magon achosed Rabbeinu Eliyahu, sheze yehereg va'al yavar, gzer shmad. V'yafal pishet tzorach yin godel b'yeinai. That's what the Chachmas Adam write. But I'm quoting the Gaon anyway. People should understand how important this is to stay away from their minhagim. How essential it is. V'kol ba nefesh yosem zois ele liboy. So he quotes the Gaon Yerek V'Aliava, but he does say tzorach yin godel b'yeinai. Why? Because in that very same sif, Chachmas Adam follows in the footsteps of the Ramah. Any minig that is not pritzus, not associated with avodah zorah, there is no prohibition. And that's why he says, why would this be Yehereg V'Aliava? And then the Gzera came to Russia and to Poland. Reb Shloime Kluger, Tuftan Vedas, Madura Kama, Kuf Peches, Kuf Peites, same as the Goen. Yehereg V'Aliava. Tzemach Tzedek. The Babetzer Rebbe Yoredei Tzaddik Tzaddik Aleph is lenient, and he says, we could do it. Beis Shloime was one of the great Gedolim in Galicia. Yoredei Kuf Tzaddik Zayin, contemporary of Reb Shloime Kluger. And he writes in his Shuva, Echad Gedolim Kosav She'osor Yehereg V'Aliava. Doesn't quote his name, but he means Reb Shloime Kluger. And he, like the Tzemach Tzedek, is lenient. On what basis is there leniency? A few different svaras. First of all, there's argumentation about the psychology of the Russians and the Lithuanians and the Poles, the authorities. Why? What bothers them if we wear our traditional garb? The Gaon assumed that it's a Gzera Shmad. They want to tear us away from Torah. They want to tear us away from Yiddishkeit. They want to tear us away from our tradition. And therefore, Yerek V'Aliava. And that is the understanding of Reb Shloime Kluger. Tzemach Tzedek, similar to the Beis Shloime, they argue, no. It's not tearing us away from our tradition. They just feel that Jews are insulated. They don't feel any national sentiment, patriotism. They're all locked up in their ghettos and their communities. So make the Jews feel more like nationals, like citizens of Russia, of Lithuania, of Poland, to have more patriotism in their hearts, in their communities. That is why they wanted us to dress up like them, and therefore it's not a Gzera Shmad. Tzemach Tzedek has another argument, which is very interesting. Well, maybe the first 100 or the first 1,000 or the first 10,000 Jews that dressed up like the Goyim, they were over on Bechukasem Lo Talechu. But today, hundreds of thousands of Jews dress up like the Goyim. It is no longer a Goyish Beged. Interesting. Similar to the Chassam Sofer, Tshuvas L'chaim Kuf Nun Tes. Fascinating Chassam Sofer. He was asked, is it legitimate to shave one's beard? Not with a tar. There is no Isser of lo sakifu. Peisagonam lo yegalechu. But is there a prohibition mitzad b'chukaseim lo talechu? Chassam Sofer is fascinating. At first he says, who says it started off by the Goyim? Maybe we were the first ones to shave our beards. We don't know. And he writes, all the Gedolim in Italy shaved their beards. Ahead of the pack, one of the greatest of the Italian Gedolim, the Ramami Pano, had no beard at all. That's what the Chassam Sofer writes. Some testified that the Ramchal shaved his beard. So who says it's Minhag Hagoyim? And then the Chassam Sofer writes, even if it would and did originate by the Goyim, that after so many years that hundreds and thousands of Jews shaved their beards, it's no longer Chukas Akum, no longer Chukas Hagoyim. So the Tzemach Tzedek regarding your dress, similar to the Chassam Sofer regarding shaving, similar to what I wrote in Minchas Chumash Shemaisim and Aleph regarding changing one's name. and using Goyish names, which was also a great controversy. Chukas Maram Shik or Chaim Kuf Samachtes writes, it's a lav b'chukoi se'em lo talechu. You can't use Goyish names. Well, some of my best friends in America, and the greatest people I know, Anshe Chesed, Anshe Torah, Ralph, Henry, George, Michael, Jake, Kenny, and all these names are some of my best friends. Are they over on alav? I brought the most important source, Chuvis Maharajdam Yoredea Kuf Tzadik. That's 600 years ago. The Maharajdam was one of the greatest poskim. And he was asked by the Marranos, the time of the Inquisition, in Spain and in Portugal. So the first stage, they pretended to convert. And they kept their Yiddishkeit with a zeal, b'chadrei chadorim, in their cellars. But only for a short period, till they could get organized, arrange for their families and their children to be able to leave, salvage some of their fortune, some of their money, and then they went into exile. And then they turned to the Maharajdam. Our business associates and partners know us by our non-Jewish names. Are we entitled to correspond with them using our non-Jewish names? And the Maram says, of course you're entitled to do so. It's only a Midas Chasidus. Contrary to the Maram Shik. So when I wrote about this sugya, I brought a very fundamental tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein. And he argues, no problem at all using Goyish names. And he quotes various sources. Tosfos and Gittin brings Rabbeinu Peter. Anybody that knows a little bit of history knows that Peter is not a very Jewish name. It's a very Christian name. And there was a Baal Tosfos, Rabbeinu Peter. He was a friend of Rabbeinu Tam. There was an Amoyre named Alexandri. Alexander is a Greek name. I brought about 15 different sources from Bavli, from Yerushalmi, from the Rishonim, Tanoa Mamarom, the greatest Gedolim, using non-Jewish names. Some Gedolim were Todros, which is a Roman name. Some used Spanish names. Theophile, Theovile, whose Jewish name was Reb Nassan Elvile. He used the name Theo, which is a Spanish name, and many others. So one of the arguments I wrote, there are names that originally were Goyish names, but no longer. Take Alexander as an example. I think today Alexander is more popular amongst the Jews than amongst the Greeks. So Alexander would no longer be defined as a Goyish name. I brought two sources in Yerushalmi. Reb Titos. That seems like a shocker. Titos. So probably in those days there were 50,000 Romans named Titos. Only one was our arch enemy. One of the most awful characters in Jewish history. Destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. So a name that originally was a Goyish name, not necessarily forever. So there's some sofer regarding shaving. What I wrote, Lagabe, names would be the same as what the Tzemach Tzedek writes about the way you dress up. So this Gzeira went on and on. Tofresh Daled came to Krakow. But the authorities in Krakow were somewhat more sophisticated, and they knew won't work to try to impose on the Jews to change their traditional clothes, garb. Their decree was a different one. Anyone that wants to get married below 30 years of age needs to change his levush. But the singles, the non-married, they don't need to change their clothes. And if you want to get married and you're 30 years or older, you don't need to change your clothes. Strange Gzeira. And once again, there was a huge machlokes between the Gedolim. What are we supposed to do? The Imre Eish, the greatest disciple of the Chassam Sofer, I'm an anakel of the Imre Eish. Yoredei Siman Nun Hey says, he agrees with the Gra against the Ramah. Any minhag is prohibited. We will not change our clothes, even if we need to wait till 30 years to get married. The Jik of a Rav, Chelik Beisim and Tet Zayin, Shalosh Shuvas Imre Noyim, is adamantly opposed. And he writes, Chaz v'sholom ti b'mevatel prior v'yo. Chaz v'sholom. But once again, they tried to go into the brains of the Polish authorities. What do they have in mind? And both agree. This would not be defined as a Gezeres Shmad. What they really want is to limit the number of Jews. Pen Yirba, Pen Yifroitz, Venoisav Gamuel Sonain, all the anti-Semites throughout the ages complained. Jews multiply too fast. There are too many of them. They're taking over our country. So what they had in mind, they weren't interested in what we wear. They just wanted us to get married over 30 years of age and have less kids. And therefore the Imre Noam says, if we wait till 30 years to get married, we are cooperating with the Goyim. That is what they want. Chaz v'sholem. Change your clothes and ben shmoines lechuppah. Just an interesting historical phenomenon. Generally, Hasidim were far more devoted to not change their clothes. Hasidim always dressed the same way as their ancient forefathers. You know, sometimes when I visit Europe, summer, and Goyim see with a shtreimel, they politely approach me and they ask, why would a person wear a fur hat in the middle of the summer? That's a very good question. Seems to be insane. Why would someone wear a fur hat when it's hot outside? So I politely try to explain to us, a hat is not only a hat. It's part of identity. It's part of who you are. It's part of the continuity of our people. But when it came to this controversy, interesting, all the Litvische, all the Misnagdim were Machmir, and the Rabbeim were Mekel. The Gaon was the Gaon, the biggest Misnagid in history. Reb Shlomo Kluger was a Misnagid. And they wrote Yerek Valyava that Tzemach Tzedek was a Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he is lenient. The Imre Eish is a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer. He is Machmir. The Imre Noam was a Rebbe, the Jik of a Rebbe. He is Mekel. But I must admit that there was one Admar that was Machmir, and that was the Chidush Yarim. Thousands of Hasidim crossed the border from Poland to neighboring countries in order not to change Minhag Avosayim and not to change their lavush. Though this is just an interesting and fascinating historical controversy. Coming back to our fundamental sugya. So one of the manifestations of Chukas Lo Tolech was your hairdo, your hairstyle. The Gemara says in Bava Kama Pei Gimel, Hetiru lemekorovim namalchus, the family of the Nosi Rabbi Gamliel, lesaper kumi, to take the traditional Goyish hairstyle. What was the heta? Especially if we're dealing with the Issa Diurais. Taisus asked this question on the spot, and Taisus says, Mitchila lo yigazlu al mekorovim namalchus. Seems to be clear, Taisus' opinion, we're dealing with an Issa Derabon and a Gzeira. And in the first place, they didn't make the Gzeira, Mekarovim Lamalchus. But the B'si Yosef in Kufayin Chesed Yerodea maintains, no, it's not a Derabanan, we're dealing with the Dioraisa. So what could be the heter? And the B'si Yosef writes two different Svaras Lekula. Number one, Nimsar Adavar HaChachamim. The Yisra B'Chukasayim L'Tolecha was a general. It is up to Chazal to define the specifics. And therefore, Yesh B'Yodam L'Hokal V'La'achmir. This is a huge discussion in Minchas Asher. It is one of the most fundamental sugyas in which I wonder, why did it wait for me? So somewhere in Chumash Devorim, I don't recall exactly which siman, but in the new edition of Minchas Asher Atar, there's a separate volume which is index, and you could find it in 10 seconds. So I have a lengthy discussion about the concept of Nimsar Adavar HaChachamim. Response number 2 of the B'si Yosef is also a Gavaldig Chiddush in the Tchum of Pikuach Nefesh. The B'si Yosef writes, Mekarovim Lamalchus, to be presentable, to be able to mingle with the Goyim, is Pikuach Nefesh. Sometimes there's a Gezerah that we need to fight against. So we need proper people in the proper places with the proper connections to care for our community and to be mevatel Gzeres Koshes. And this is a huge chiddush in Pikuach Nefesh, which is Doicha Isurei Torah. And on my Chukas, I proved from this Yosef. And not only from this B'si Yosef, I have about 7 or 8 different sources. Pikuach Nefesh is indirect, not immediate, day after tomorrow, but it is still defined as Pikuach Nefesh. We don't know how many people had the heter L'saper Kumi. Was it tens? Was it hundreds? How would we know? Mishpachas Anosi Mikorovem Lamalchus. And if you need to mingle with the high society of the Goyim, you probably don't take a haircut twice a year, Erev Pesach and Erev Rosh Hashanah, like some Hasidim, or once in 3 months like others. Probably you take a haircut, you shave and take a haircut once a week, maximum once in 2 weeks. So dozens of people were over on an Issa D'Oraisa on a steady basis, because sometimes there's a Gezerah that we could mediate, that we could mitigate. And if there is a Gezerah, I assume they didn't have 300 people marching to the king's palace. We had people with the right connections. Rebbe Aleph is a friend of the High Commissioner of the Police. Rebbe Beis is a friend with the king's personal secretary. Rebbe Gimel has connections with the Minister of the Interior. That is the nature of Shtadlanis, the nature of Mekorovim Lamalchus. So that's a big chiddush regarding Pikuach Nefesh. The Bach comes up with a new suggestion which is extremely fundamental. And the Bach writes, the Yisra B'Chukasayim L'Tolecha essentially is Shaloi Ledamis Legoyim. And therefore it depends on the nature of things. It depends on the intentions. So those tzaddikim, the family of Rabbi Gamliel, the family of Rebbe, they had no reason and no will to be like Goyim. All they wanted is to serve our community, and therefore that's not B'Chukasayim L'Tolecha. So the Bach is a Gavaldige Chiddush. 2 people do exactly the same thing. To one, it's a mitzvah, not an avera at all, and to the other, it's an issa d'oraisa. If the reason you take this haircut is because you're running away from your identity, you're running away from your Jewishness, and you want to be like them, that's the issa b'chukasayim lo telecha. This brings me back to all my friends, the Ralphs and the Henrys and the Jacks and the Jakes and who knows what. And I want to respond and share with you my thoughts about the huge machlokes between the Marashdam that says it's only a Midas Chasidus and the Maram Shik that says it's a Dioraisa. 2 different periods, 2 different backgrounds, different trajectories. The Maramshik was a Talmud of the Chassam Sofer. He stood in the forefront of the fight, the battle against the reformists and the maskilim in the days of the Maramshik. When a person adopted a Goyish name, it is because he was on his way out. He was embarrassed with his Jewishness. He wanted to escape his tradition. He wanted out. He really wanted to be like them. And that is why the Maramshik was so machmir. And he writes in his Chukas lo telecho. In the days of the Marashdam, those were tzaddikim gemurim. They left Spain, they left Portugal, b'mesirus nefesh. They went into exile. Many of them didn't even know where they're going. Had nowhere to go. Like Avraham Avinu, lech lecha, el ha'oretz asher areka. That's not an Aveda. So the people I'm referring to are not embarrassed with their Yiddishkeit. They're not on their way out. They're not going anywhere. They are proud of their Yiddishkeit. They have their tzitzis outside with a big black yarmulke. The reason they use non-Jewish names, convenience, just for the fun of it. I don't know why, but that is not b'chukoseim lo telechu. So just as a side comment, in my friendship with many of these people, Henry told me, I'm not Henry, I'm Chaim. Ralph told me, call me Raphael. Jake told me, please call me Yaakov, that's my name. Now, I'm not mentioning any family names because, this is private. Just throwing out names in a very general way. So I don't think that's an Isser at all. But I definitely would say, Tzmidas Chassidus, preferable to use our holy Shemes HaKadoshim, Shemes Avoseinu HaKadoshim. Those names, especially the ones in Loshen Kodesh, that have the holy letters of our Aleph base, definitely preferable. So today we discuss B'chukoseim lo telechu. And there are many things people do today, maybe not in the Frum community, but Jewish people. Brings us to the question, is it legitimate or not? Could you put flowers on a grave? Would that be a prohibition? In the whole world, people put flowers on graves. According to the Ramo, would be no Isser. Kavod. It's not associated in any way with the religious practice, and it's not Pritzus. According to the Ramo, it's mutar lechatchila. According to the Gro, it's also. And the same to many other minhagim. So let me share with you something I said many times. Why did the Goyim put flowers on graves and we put a rock on a grave? Nothing in nature is as beautiful as a flower. That's what I think. Probably the most beautiful thing in nature is a flower. But only so an hour. There's a person at Amot that buys me flowers every year of Shabbos. And every Shabbos the flowers are different than the previous one. And from Shabbos morning I am already waiting, anticipating, how would this week's flowers look? I love flowers. They add to Simchas Shabbos. But by Tuesday I always want to get rid of them. A withering flower is a pathetic sight. Makes you sad. Hai shifra, the bole ba'ara. Flower is beautiful, but it is only temporary. A rock is not very appealing, but it's forever. Nothing in the physical world is as enduring as a rock. So they put flowers on a grave. They don't believe in a shadows nefesh. They don't believe in olam haba. To them, it was beautiful, but it's over. We believe in eternity. We believe that life is forever. So we put a rock on a grave. A rock is forever. More than that. Misham roye Even Yisrael, writes Rashi, Even is an abbreviation of Av Uben. Even symbolizes a continuity. Kol hamaniach ben kemoisoi mala olav hakosaf ki'ilu hu chai. Yankov Avinu lo meis. More than that. Even is 3 letters. Av ben neched. Av ben neched. 3 generations is eternity. Kol shu talmid chochem, beno talmid chochem, ben beno talmid chochem. Ein ha-Torah posekes mezarai liyolam. So we put rocks on a grave. They put flowers. But by halachic criteria, according to the Ramo, it's permitted. According to the Go, it's prohibited. The vast majority of Achronim follow in the footsteps of the Ramo. And in Minchas Osher, I proved from the Rishonim the opinion of the Ramo. So today we discussed fascinating sugi b'chukaseim lo telechu. Va'avdel eschem en Hagoyim. I just want to share with you some fundamental thoughts about separating ourselves from the Goyim. 2 of the greatest pre-Holocaust Gedolim in Lithuania, Reb Meir Simcha of Divinsky and Reb Elchanan Wasserman, Hashem Yinkum Domoi, write some very similar thoughts. Meshech Chochmah Parshas B'chukoisai, such beautiful language. Reb Meir Simcha analyzes Jewish history. And he says whenever Jews left their tradition and felt so comfortable where they were in Golas, amongst the Goyim, and they became an integral part of Goyish society, there will always come a huge tidal wave, a tsunami, a hurricane, to uproot them and throw them away from where they felt so comfortable. And almost in a prophetic way, sounds almost like prophecy, like nevuah. Reb Meir Simcha writes 15 years before the horrific Holocaust. Hayehudi yachshov ki Berlin hu Yerushalayim. The Jew will confuse Berlin with Yerushalayim. Uchim mekulkolam shebem asitem kemetukonim lo asisem. Al tismach Yisrael al gilbo amim. Az yavu roach so'a v'sar. Yakor oto migiz'o. That's prophecy. Reb Elchanan Wasserman, in a famous essay, Ikvese de Meshicha, expresses similar ideas. And he quotes the Beis Halevi, a fascinating thought. Maitzur Shabbos B'Yavdola, we say, Amavle ben Ola Choshech, ben Yisrael Oamim. The difference between Ola Choshech is fixed by nature. Mesheishes Yemei Bereishis. We know every day what separates day from night. Ben Hashmoshes, we know 100 years in advance. The same is the separation between Yisrael and Amim. It is a heavenly decree. And we try to deny that separation. Kodesh Baruch Hu will remind us. As a historical fact, it's fascinating. In medieval times, 600 years ago, Jews were more integrated into Spanish society than any other society. Jews were broadly accepted. The Abarbanel, one of the greatest of our Gedolim, was the finance minister of Spain. And then came the Inquisition. We felt too comfortable in Spain. Germany between 2 world wars, and even before World War I, tens of thousands of Jews converted to Christianity. Not because they were Christian. They were atheists. They believed nothing. Neither in our tradition, nor in Christianity. The reason they converted was just to be accepted, part of German society. The greatest poets, musicians were Jews. Heinrich Heine, Felix Mendelssohn, so many others. Jews that converted to Christianity, they believed nothing. Jews were so integrated into the German society far more than anywhere else in the world. More than in America, or England, or France, or Italy, or anywhere. And then came the horrific Holocaust. This is what Rabbi Chona Wasserman and Rameh Simcha talk about. The Polish tzaddikim said it in one word, with their special sharp style. As long as we make Kiddush, Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't need to make Havdalah. When we will stop making Kiddush, Kodesh Baruch Hu will make Havdalah. Wow, what a line. As long as we make Kiddush, we sanctify our homes. We know what it means. Kodesh Baruch Hu will rely on us. When we will stop making Kiddush, and we will confuse Yachshov ki Berlin hu Yerushalayim, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps in, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will make Havdalah. He'll teach us, you will never be German. You will never be Spanish. Whether you like it or not, you're different. You're separate. So let us choose to make Kiddush and save HaKadosh Baruch Hu from the need to make Havdalah. V'avdel eschem min u'amim. Ein lanu shiur rak ha'Torah hazois. We follow our tradition. We follow in the firm footsteps of Aviseinu, of his Aviseinu. Rabbi Seinu, going all the way back to Har Sinai. Baruch Hashem. Have a beautiful Shabbos and a great day.